Hey guys, welcome to week 4. This week we're going to be looking at the third miracle of Jesus in John 5, 1 through 9. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. One was here who had been an invalid for 38 years. Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time. He asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked.
First thing I want to look at today is a guy named George Danzig. Now, George enrolled in the graduate program of statistics at California, Berkeley, and one day he arrived late to class. The teacher had already written 2 equations up on the board that George thought was homework. But what he didn't know is what the teacher had said before he had gotten there, that these were 2 impossible statistics questions that nobody had ever solved before. So George takes these home because he thinks these are homework, and he begins working on them. And it takes him longer than he thinks it should, but he eventually finishes them and turns them into his teacher. Eventually his teacher comes in and tells him, "You solved 2 impossible equations," and he goes on to win lots of awards and have different things named after him. But what I want to look at is how him not knowing that these were impossible caused them to be possible for him. Because he was late to class and he wasn't told that this thing was supposedly impossible, he went on to do some groundbreaking research. This is one instance where ignorance is bliss. If he had heard the professor say that these were impossible, or if he had had these preconceived notions that he couldn't do them, he never would have attempted them. A lot of times the word impossible stands in the way of miracles. We let our logic, our human, fallible logic, stand in the way of what God can do. Jesus told us in Luke 1 that nothing will be impossible with God, and I think that's something that we miss a lot. A lot of times we try and put God in a box, and we try and put our human bounds on him when he's the one who created the earth. He's the one who set the laws of nature in motion. So I don't think that there's any bounds that could ever be put on him. He can do whatever he wants. And it makes sense that we come to this conclusion because it's human general knowledge, and it's what we know as humans. So we try and understand him, but in the end we have to recognize that we're not going to understand everything. None of these laws apply to God. Jesus can make our impossible possible. We just have to let him. And that's what happened in this story this week. The man hadn't walked in 38 years. I would reason to believe that he thought he would never walk again, that he thought it was impossible that he would ever walk again. And there's no shortage of other examples of impossible things that God or Jesus have done, like Abraham and Sarah having a son at 100, or God flooding the earth, or creating the earth. The bottom line is our mindset has to be that God is able. We can't get to the mindset that some things are impossible to him. This is a false assumption. I don't know what you guys have in your lives individually that seems impossible, that seems insurmountable by you or by God even. But I encourage you to take it to him because he can't answer prayers that are never prayed. Another thing I want us to recognize is that God may not always answer our prayers exactly how we want them. He may not always answer them exactly when we want them, but we have to be open to how he answers our prayers and recognize them when he does, even if it's not necessarily what we want. The crippled man in this story spent the majority of his life by the pool of Bethesda. He had a false belief in the powers of the pool of Bethesda. You see, there was a spring that fed into this pool, and the waters would stir up occasionally, and they had no idea why. But later on, people figured out that it's these springs. But they used to think that it was some supernatural power, and the first crippled person to get in would be healed. That's why this man stayed by the pool. This was his false belief. He believed that if he was ever the first person to get in, he'd be healed. This was his false assumption. And this is what kept him from living a full life. But Jesus came in and broke this false assumption. This man was in an unhealthy cycle with reliance on something that was never going to save him. And Jesus broke that cycle. Sometimes we get stuck in cycles like this. We put our beliefs in something false or something that can't save us. And a lot of times we don't see this. Sometimes it takes somebody coming up to us and saying, how's this working out for you? Is this doing anything? And then we kind of start to evaluate like, is this helping me? Is this healthy? For us to see our own false belief, sometimes that's what it takes. For God to be able to do new things in our lives, we have to break these cycles. We can't keep doing the same old thing and expecting different results. To experience the miraculous, we need to unlearn every assumption about God we have ever learned except for one. God is able.
So for God to do this new thing in our lives, we have to trust that God is able. But also you have to think about, how do you change the course of history? How do you change the course of your life? And so when you think about those two questions, you have to start thinking about what habits you're currently in, what things you find yourself in the middle of doing, and how those things may actually be holding you back from experiencing the miracle that God is trying to provide or has for your life. And so we have stories like Dr. Kane, who looked at the way that surgery was done, and so surgeries at that point in his career were general anesthesia. And so if you had anything done, you would have to be put to sleep the entire time for any surgery. So he felt like local anesthesia would work. And so what he did was he actually gave himself local anesthesia, operated on himself, and then 2 days later walked out of the hospital. It was only after he took that risk and changed the course of history when it came to surgeries forever that we were able to move forward as a society. We have to think about what it's going to take for us to look at what's happening in our own lives and how we know that we can make the world better, and then be willing to take a step forward for the miracles to happen in our lives. It's also like the high jumper, Dick Fosbury. He actually, when he was going into the Mexico Olympics, realized that he could not make the same kinds of jumps that other people were doing. His frame, it just did not work. So he decided to try a new style where he would run and jump with his back towards the pole. And so he ran and he jumped over and set a new world record. The next Olympics, he was the only one who used that style at that Olympics. The next Olympics, 28 out of 40 had adopted his style of jumping because they saw the benefits of that style. So for so many of us, we may be operating in current systems that just don't work anymore, but we're unwilling to take that step to see what happens as we meet God in something that could be miraculous in our lives. So we have to take that step to change that history for ourselves. How do you change your life? You have to want change in order for change to occur. You have to pursue it and work for it. We know because of scientific research, even the way we exercise. If you exercise the same way every day, your muscles become attuned to that style of exercise and no longer grow, no longer develop. And actually you start to regress. Your muscles can atrophy over time of not being in use. If you've ever broken a leg or torn an ACL, you know what it looks like to come back from injuries like that. You know that those muscles atrophy, and we get into these spiritual habits or these physical habits where we are atrophying, and so we don't see or are not prepared or not willing to do the work in which miracles occur. So in this situation, when Jesus asks the question, do you want to get well? He wants to know if the man is willing to do the things it would take for the miracle to be to actually change his life. Is he going to be willing not only to get off his mat, but then to walk, then to run, then to skip, then to dance, then to jump? Like, we have to realize this man has not done any of these things before. This is all brand new to him. For so many of you, there's things that you are afraid to do. You're afraid to experience because you've never done them before. Maybe you need to sign up for that mission trip. Maybe you need to sit at a different table in your lunchroom. Maybe you need to start a prayer journal, or maybe it would be something like committing to a fast. There are things that you've never tried or never experienced that could be holding you back from encounters with God that could change your life. So when Jesus asks the question, he's not being mean. He's trying to help that man and help us understand that with change comes a new lifestyle, and Jesus is trying to help the man understand, is he actually ready for this? Does he really want to get well, or does he want to continue to sit by the pool hoping that his life will change without anything from him, without him having to do anything to pursue that? The miracle of Jesus lines up with several other miracles in the Bible, especially the miracle that happened in Naaman's life with Elijah. When he told him to go and wash in the river, he didn't want to go to the Jordan River. He wanted to go to one of his rivers back home, or he wanted to find another way for it to happen. But when he did what he was told to do, doing something that felt out of his comfort zone, that he didn't feel was natural, we saw what happened in the miracle that occurred in his life. For us, the simple fact is we can't keep doing what has always been done and expect things to change. We are going to have to find ways to change the habits we're in and pursue God to find the miracles that He has for our lives. I want you to think about it again. Every step the man took was a brand new step. There are things in your life right now that have to be brand new. Maybe you've taken a step out, but you haven't run with God yet. Maybe you haven't danced with God yet. Maybe you have not jumped or climbed a tree. There's so many different ways in our spiritual life where we're not experiencing God and the miracles of God because we're unwilling to take the next step in that relationship. When we are fearful of what is next and don't know how God is going to show up, we lose out on so many opportunities and experiences to understand the miracles of God. I hope you will remember the question that Jesus asked when He asked this man about the miracle that is about to be performed. Do you want to get well? And the follow-up question for us is, are you willing to walk? So this week we are trying to think through, what is it going to look like for us to want to be well? What does it look like for you to walk with God, to experience not just a miracle, but a miraculous life, a life that is lived in the experiences of God and with God? And to do that, it's going to require you to make some changes in your life. We hope that those changes happen for you so that you can experience God in the way that He desires to have a relationship with you. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next week.